The 7 Types of Mindfulness, by Venerable Rung Ruang Papas Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chupatipa. Because of the varieties of mindfulness applications as previously mentioned, it is very clear that the mindfulness is very important, and mentioned in 37 Factors for Enlightenment, the mindfulness can be defined into 7 types of progressive mindfulness development. 1. The mindfulness establishment. 2. The continuance of mindfulness. 3. The faculty of mindfulness at 6 sense bases to monitor the mind and its processing. 4. The empowered mindfulness to abandon any arising unwholesomeness. 5. The purified mindfulness, non-biased mindfulness, to perform insight observation. 6. The right mindfulness with application on 4 mindfulness foundations: on body, on feeling, on mind, on Dharma. 7. The mindfulness for enlightenment. 1. The mindfulness establishment. The mindfulness initialization is a preliminary technique to be awakened up by performing some practice activities such as walking up and down, mindfulness breathing, making bodily movement. The key to initialize mindfulness in these practices is to realize when having a contact in walking or breathing or bodily movement, then cognizing the sensing of being aware of having consciousness. This kind of awareness of what is happening at that moment is the arising of mindfulness. In performing Buddhist practice, the Buddha explained that a person should start with establishing mindfulness first as follows.
Possessing this aggregate of noble moral discipline and this noble restraint of the faculties, and possessing this noble mindfulness and clear comprehension, he resorts to a secluded resting place. The forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, and a heap of straw. After his meal he sits down, folding his legs crosswise, setting his body erect and establishing mindfulness before him. Abandoning longing for the world, he purifies his mind from doubt.
2. The continuance of mindfulness. Typically, the mindfulness will arise and fade away in conjunction with the consciousness. Therefore, mindfulness must be reinitiated every time whenever having consciousness in order to continue the establishment of mindfulness again and again. The Buddha discovered that if the mind was wholesome, then the mind would be glad and happy, and then the mindfulness will be re-established, saying the continuance of mindfulness. In Chanusati Sutta, the Venerable Mahakaccana explained on how to establish the continuance of mindfulness as follows.
The practice of the continuance of mindfulness can be performed by either of these 6 alternative ways as follows. 1. By establishing mindfulness with the merit of Buddha as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of Buddha as follows. The Blessed One is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the Enlightened One, the Blessed One. Then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness. This kind of technique is a basis for establishing mindfulness by recollection of the merits of Buddha. 2. By establishing mindfulness with the Dharma as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of Dharma as follows. The Dharma is well expounded by the Blessed One, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, worthy of application, to be personally experienced by the wise. Then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness. This kind of technique is a basis for establishing mindfulness by recollection of the Dharma. 3. By establishing mindfulness with the Sangha as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of Sangha as follows. The Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the 4 pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals. This Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. Then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness. This kind of technique is a basis for establishing mindfulness by recollection of the orders of noble disciple. 4. By establishing mindfulness with moral disciple as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of moral discipline as follows. I possess the moral virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unmottled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped, leading up to concentration. The wholesomeness of the moralities. Then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness. 5. By establishing mindfulness with the past generosity as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of generosity as follows. It is a gain for me, it is well gained by me, that in a population obsessed by the stain of stinginess, I dwell at home with a mind devoid of the stain of stinginess, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in relinquishment, one devoted to charity, delighting in giving and sharing. Then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness. This kind of technique is a basis for compassion meditation. 6. By establishing mindfulness with devas as its object, and determining on the wholesomeness and goodness of devas as follows. There are devas in the various heavenly realms. There is found in me such faith, moral discipline, learning, generosity, and wisdom as those devas possessed, because of which, when they passed away from this world, they were reborn there. Then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is the continuance of mindfulness.
3. The faculty of mindfulness at sensing bases to monitor the mind and its processing. This is a special quality of mind to activate mindfulness right away once starting a mind processing when receiving a stimulus from the world through the 6 sense bases. The terms having mindfulness becomes a faculty at the 6 sense bases is to emphasize that whatever signal arriving into the mind from any channel of 6 sense bases, mindfulness must be activated to be aware of the arriving stimulus, so that the mind will be fully alert of what is coming inside the mind at all the time as follows.
On seeing a form with the eye, he does not grasp at its signs and features. Since, if he left the eye faculty unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of longing and dejection might invade him, he practices the way of its restraint, he guards the eye faculty, and he undertakes the restraint of the eye faculty. On hearing a sound with the ear, and he undertakes the restraint of the ear faculty. On smelling an odor with the nose, and he undertakes the restraint of the nose faculty. On tasting a flavor with the tongue, and he undertakes the restraint of the tongue faculty. On feeling a tactile object with the body, and he undertakes the restraint of the body faculty. On cognizing mental phenomenon with the mind, he does not grasp at its signs and features. Since, if he left the mind faculty unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of longing and dejection might invade him, he practices the way of its restraint, he guards the mind faculty, and he undertakes the restraint of the mind faculty.
4. The empowered mindfulness to abandon any arising unwholesomeness. In performing the Buddhist practice, the quality of mindfulness will be improved to be more sensitive to detect even any subtle mind condition, just like having a high powerful magnification of electron microscope to see microorganism. As mindfulness will bring the mind to become concentrated. In the meantime, the concentration will empower the mindfulness to be more powerful. It should be noticed that the powered mindfulness and the powered concentration will be complemented to each other both in terms of sensitivity and stability of the mind in order to abandon all the 5 lower fetters inside the mind, before dwell into the first jhana as follows.
By establishing mindfulness and performing the Yoniso Manasikara to abandon the unwholesome thoughts of the 5 lower fetters, then the mind will proceed into the development of 7 factor for enlightenment. The Yoniso Manasikara is the basis for the Buddhist practice in order to abandon the 5 lower fetters and to attain the 7 factors for enlightenment.
5. The purified mindfulness to perform insight observation. After performing mindfulness meditation, and all the 5 lower fetters are cleansed out, then the mind will dwell into an inner mind in the mindfulness absorption. At this time we will abandon the initial thought with liberated thinking, and once all the unwholesome thoughts are uprooted, then the mind will be in rapture, equanimity, and reaching one-pointedness, respectively. At this moment, the Buddha suggested to neutralize the mind by not being in favor or non-favor against on an arising phenomenon, and the mindfulness will be developed to be purified mindfulness by equanimity. The purified mindfulness is a special kind of mindfulness that is developed in the fourth jhana as follows.
The fourth jhana of the mindfulness absorption. After the cessation of being relaxed, then the mind is in state of tranquility with one-pointedness. And at this time, by keeping the mindfulness not to bias on any arising object of consciousness, and then the mind will develop into the purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. The mind is in neutral and being unbiased to any mental phenomenon, which is ready for performing the four mindfulness foundations.
6. The right mindfulness on the four mindfulness foundations. The four mindfulness foundations consist of 4 types of areas of investigations, including the mindfulness on body observations, the mindfulness on feeling observations, the mindfulness on mind observations, and the mindfulness on Dharma as follows. The mindfulness on body to see the reality of the object of consciousness in relation to the body. It is an application of mindfulness to realize on the truths about the body. The mindfulness on feeling to see the reality of the object of consciousness in relation to the feeling. It is an application of mindfulness to realize on the truths about the feeling. The mindfulness on mind to see the reality of the object of consciousness in relation to the mind. It is an application of mindfulness to realize on the truths about the mind. The mindfulness on Dharma, to understand the whole picture of the truths of life within nature. It is an application of having mindfulness to observe the whole system of the stream of consciousness in terms of mind processing responding to the nature. 7. The mindfulness for enlightenment. In order to progress to enlightenment, 7 factors for enlightenment are required, including the mindfulness for enlightenment as follows.
By having sufficiently performing the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom in faculties, then they will collectively be a basis for the empowerments of the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom, respectively. By having sufficiently performing both the faculties and empowerments of the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom, then they will collectively be a basis for performing insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations. By having sufficiently performing insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations, then it will collectively be a basis for performing the 7 factors for enlightenment. By having sufficiently performing the 7 factors for enlightenment, then they will collectively be a basis for performing the Noble Eightfold Path.